Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Today, we're discussing Brexit. What are the implications for the African diaspora living in Britain, and what are the likelihoods of an increase in trade between Britain and her Commonwealth partners? Before we delve into those discussions, here are some business headlines from across the globe. Forbes have named Mukesh Ambani the richest man in Asia. The chairman and managing director of Reliance Industries is estimated to be worth $50 billion. His firm is active in areas such as energy, retail and telecommunications, with revenue of $90 billion. In Europe, trade unions, leftist organisations and some academics have called for a far broader, economy-wide transition to cutting office hours to a 4-day work week. The initiative has already won backing from some of the biggest unions in Ireland and Britain. The Bank of England's chief economist said that the UK is on track for a 4-day week by 2050. Barney's, an iconic American luxury clothing brand, has filed for bankruptcy. The New York-based retailer said in a statement the filing will allow the company to conduct a sale process, review current leases and optimize operations. Court documents show that the 96-year-old company owes nearly $10 million in unpaid rent to its major landlords. The African Development Bank has provided a $4.8 million grant to support the AU's efforts in rolling out the Continental Free Trade Area. The grant forms part of a series of measures by the Development Bank. The trade agreement is seen as a major force for integrating the 55-nation continent and transforming its economy.
Africa cannot be a market where others simply import and put stuff in. Africa has to have its own industrial capacity to be able to take advantage of a $3.3 trillion market with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Now over to our main discussion, Brexit. Our correspondent Simon Pusey will remind us how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Juliana. Yes, way back in June the 23rd, 2016, feels like a long time ago now, the question was put to the British people by David Cameron, the then Prime Minister: do you want to stay in the European Union or do you want to leave? And the vote came back. A big surprise to a lot of people in London, at least, was no. 51.8% of people said no, they don't. And so David Cameron decided it was his turn to resign. There was a leadership contest and Theresa May won that leadership election. She voted to remain, but she made it her top priority to get the UK out of the EU. Of course, she failed. She tried 3 times to get it through the Houses of Commons. Her deal that she negotiated with the EU, 3 times it was voted down. So she decided that it was her turn to resign. There was another leadership election runoff, and Boris Johnson, of course, came to the fore. And he has very different ideas on Brexit and of leaving. He's a strong leaver, and he says he wants to get a deal with the EU, but he is willing to leave without a deal if necessary. And that's where we are at the moment, because the EU are saying they don't want to renegotiate the deal. They said the deal they negotiated with Theresa May is the best one. Boris Johnson said that deal is dead. So at the moment, it looks like we might be heading for a no-deal Brexit.
That was Simon Pusey there, our business correspondent. Now, India, Canada, Australia and some parts of Africa have been referred to as a magical alternative to Britain's current trade and investment relationship with the EU. UK exports of goods and services to the Commonwealth are worth $68.4 billion, while trade with the EU is valued at $333 billion. As Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab wraps up his first official tour seeking renewed trade relationships outside of Europe, what realistic role, if any, does the Commonwealth play in post-Brexit Britain?
For the UK, Brexit is not just about risk management, although that's important, and I wouldn't want to be glib or not take that very seriously. But it's also, and I think our Prime Minister has been very clear about that, it's also about grasping the enormous opportunities of our newfound freedoms. And yes, we're going to remain, and we hope to be, good European neighbours, partners and friends in the future. But we do want to grasp those global opportunities, and we want to expand our horizons and raise our level of ambitions in the world.
Joining me to discuss this is social political campaigner, Councillor Susan Fajana-Thomas, and Femi Okutubo, publisher of Trumpet Media Group UK. Welcome, really nice to see you guys. Sister Susan, let me start with you first. Is the Commonwealth key to Britain's post-Brexit trade strategy?
I'll say no. It is a 50-50 win, because I think I'll use the words of former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. I think it is an illusion. At the moment, the UK trade ties with the G7 states are actually stronger than what they have with African countries and other Commonwealth countries. So I think, and I believe, with the government we have in the UK at the moment, that they will look more into the G7 state and the Middle East for bilateral trade agreement, rather than looking into Africa or other Commonwealth nations.
Obviously, I think if one is going to give Britain some credit, it's the fact that, at least the government has been looking at both sides of the coin. They've tried as much as possible to look at all the possibilities, and it's only natural that those kind of relationships are sort of nurtured. Whether they would yield the results that is expected is another issue entirely.
Let me ask about what's going on with diaspora members of the community. You're both key figures within that. What are we doing? What are they doing to put pressure on Britain? Because some are saying that, hang on a minute, this is an opportunity for Africans, especially those of us who are in the UK, literally on the doorstep of number 10 Downing Street, to say, hang on, we're here, let's build these trade relationships. Or is it not that easy?
Thank you. That's why I smile. It's not that easy, and I don't think anyone can put pressure on Boris Johnson or whatever this cabinet decision they're going to make. And majority of, as you know, majority of people from Africa are actually Remainers. They campaign for the UK to remain in.
But we're leaving, Sister Susan.
That is the reality.
Deal, we will be leaving.
The reality is, I'm not going to. I'm a bit biased, like you said. I can say to you, I wouldn't be forthright saying deal or no deal. We are leaving. Between now and 31st of October, something can happen. I know the Prime Minister is going a sort of a bit of a degree of arrogance and ignorance. He's making him to say deal or no deal. Come 31st of October, the UK is going to leave the EU. But I'm not going to be 100% to say that is going to happen. That might not happen.
That's an interesting point, and something, let me pick it up with you, Femi, because as Susan said here, many Nigerians, many Africans of the diaspora, Africans living in the UK did vote to remain. But if the government and businesses are now pushing towards leaving the EU, do you think we're too far behind, that we're sleeping?
I don't think we're slipping, and to say the truth, I'm not even sure things are as clear-cut as it appears. Because number one, don't forget that even when you look at the Boris government at the moment, or the Premiership, they only have a very slim majority in the House, in the Parliament.
One seat.
Just one seat. Now, there's a possibility that if you're going to have the Labour government and even people from within the Conservative government who are likely to form some form of alliance and say that no, we don't agree with just leaving Britain, leaving EU, with or without a deal. We've got to have a clear-cut stand. And if that happens, I think we're going to be seeing a constitutional crisis that we've not even expected. There's a possibility that, an alternative government will be formed. And if an alternative government is formed, the Queen is going to be in a very difficult situation where she has to choose between whether to support the Boris government or this new alternative government.
That's a possible, unlikely outcome. But it's definitely a possibility. But what are Africans doing to take advantage of Britain's political climate at the moment?
I don't think there is anything proactively that Africans are doing at the moment because of the uncertainty, as Femi put it earlier on, because even just yesterday, the businesses in the UK, they said 70% of businesses in the UK are not actually ready for a no-deal exit scenario. So majority of Africans, there is this sort of wait and see what is going to happen, what is going to be the end game. So I don't think we're proactively doing anything to say we are here. But I just want to mention something. The UK is is home to a large population of African migrants, people in diaspora like us, and the UK is like the 10th country where they have the highest remittances in the whole of the world. And those remittances in terms of Africa, a lot of remittances go from people in diaspora to Africa, which contributes to a major to African economy. With no deal Brexit, as we can see, the pound is down, and what that will actually impact African economy when it comes to the remittances coming from the UK, from African migrants, African in diaspora, sending money to Africa.
That's a really interesting point, one I've not heard, but one that has tremendous value, because we know just how valuable those remittances are. We've all got family members that benefit from that. Do you think African governments then, considering how many of us are in the UK, need to take more of an interest? You're a publisher. Are they?
I don't think they are. And that's Africa for you, sadly. Sometimes...
preoccupied with domestic issues?
One. Two, I don't think we're always as proactive as we should be. We tend to be more reactionary to events or international events than we should be. But more importantly, I think it's also about the fact that Africa has probably a lot more to worry about. I also believe that even when you talk about the African diaspora community, I don't believe we're as strong and as formidable in terms of working together to be a major political force down here. So in reality, when you're talking about Brexit, and as far as the government is concerned, I don't really see, in fact, at the very best, they'll probably lump all of us together as, black and minority,
BMEs, black and minority ethnic.
So rather than
or
single
BAME.
out or BAME, rather than single out Africans. So in terms of Africa itself, like I said, even Africa is busy looking at other countries. I'm not even sure that the kind of relationship that Nigeria had with Britain, despite the fact that they were our former colonial masters, despite the fact that we're part of the Commonwealth, it's changed. And, Africa is looking at other countries of the world.
Some would say that it's evolved. If you go to a local Tesco store and Asda, there is a section where you will see some products that 10 years ago you would never see in a major grocery store. Yes, some of the plum tomatoes, some of the rice, we've all seen them. Femi, you may not go shopping much, but...
I do, actually.
Because those supermarkets, they know that we've got...
The value of the black pound is
increased in this country. And just to quickly add something to this discussion, if you remember when the former Prime Minister Theresa May went to Africa late last year, some of the policy pronouncements there at the time, what African commentators were saying is, if that were carried out, what will happen is some of the aids that goes to America, UK is a major donor of aid to America, will decrease while they try to form trade ties. That's another thing. So there are a lot of African countries that need the aid. I'm not pro-aids to Africa, but there are still some countries that need those aids coming from the UK. And if Brexit and increase in other areas of trade ties would decrease that. That is another adverse impact.
It's another adverse impact. The next time you're on, Susan, I may have to bring you on with Brexiteer and see how they'll counter that. Last point to you, Femi.
The point I wanted to make, especially about what you see in the supermarkets, that is not something that's been engineered by Britain. It's been more of diaspora Africans who have actually taken the initiative of trying to work with British mainstream in terms of getting our products into the major market. So again, I don't see that as a major issue in terms of it being a determinant in all of this.
Perhaps, we may see over the years more and more of those products coming into major stores, and instead of it just being one little section of the aisle, it could be 2 or 3 aisles. But I'm sure we'll have this discussion soon. Sister Susan Fajana Thomas, Femi Okutubo, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we'll be speaking to one man who's using his role in the diaspora to unite Africans in post-Brexit Britain. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Brexit was seen as a major wake-up call for Africans living in the UK. The referendum outcome has sparked uncertainty across the globe, but more significantly within multiracial and diverse communities across Britain. Despite the legal backing of citizenship and residency, British Africans share an increased sense of vulnerability about what happens next. I spoke to Chief Uzo Awune, the chairman of Ingo UK. He is one of many British citizens who is using business to unite Africans in post-Brexit Britain. How did the referendum result change the way British Africans conduct their business affairs? Did it change the way?
Well, I mean, the referendum has brought mixed reactions within the community. Some people think it's a force for change, but the preponderance of the African community tends to vote for Labour, and they were mainly for Remain. And well, as events are unfolding, we are just watching closely to see how it pans out. But likely, you know, there's a process that's playing out, and people are being conscious on how to manage these changing processes.
Well, if it's true that most Africans living in the UK voted to remain, do you think that changes the way they see their business affairs in a post-Brexit Britain?
We are not really lagging behind. What it's brought about is a change in the way we think, because when there's a situation of this sort, it is either that people, because change is the inevitable thing that occurs in every society. There must be change, whether for good or for bad. But it is through that process that a new order will emerge. So people have to brace up to the reality of the times. So, but going down to the African or Nigerian community, people are being aggressive in terms of repositioning themselves in business. And I think we're doing well. The Africans who are in London, and it's on record that within the BME community, the Africans in London are the fastest growing community. So we need this to reflect across board, not in institutions where people are being held for different offenses, because we seem to be more represented in that. But we're now advocating for a focus in terms of economic drive. That is why organization that I lead comes into play.
You've described the African diaspora as an economic gateway in post-Brexit Britain. What does that mean?
Well, hitherto now, we have always maintained that position that the African ambassadors, the African missions, and the African diaspora are economic gateways. Because if you want to engage in business in the continent, it's either you're talking to somebody who is an associate or a friend or a contact who is an African, or you're approaching their embassies for any business inquiry. So that is why we see that there's this synergy between the Africa diaspora and the Africa embassies as economic gateways, either into the continent or from within the continent into the UK. So it's a two-way process, and they're quite in tandem, because if we harness it, it will be a force of good, so that we'll be able to target and position ourselves to be part of the prosperity of this economy. This is the 5th largest economy in the world, and it is not good that the Africans are playing in the fringes. So we're trying to bring Africans to the mainstream. And how do we put them in the mainstream? It is to situate them to participate in the economy actively, so that the value chain will be maximized to the maximum. Because if you look at the model that the Middle East, for instance, in their oil business, Kuwait has retail outlets for their oil. They have petrol stations. Similarly, if our initiative, which we're pushing, goes through, will have Africans benefit to the fullest.
Through your African Ambassadors Forum, you're encouraging Africans living here to rebrand. Is Africa a brand?
Well, there's this saying that London is the additional extraterritorial capital, commercial city of Africa. There's hardly no African government or African business or African country that does not have presence in London. So, and that is why we are initiating and promoting the idea of an African global town in London. And this will give Africans visible economic presence. It will be a strategic one-stop shop hub for businesses, where if you go in there, just like you go to Chinatown, you see and experience everything about Africa. We are aware that this is a diverse society, but within that diversity, we need to put Africa at the center of it. And how do we achieve it? It is through having a visible business district, where if you go in there, you find food courts. If you want Cameroon food, if you want Angola, if you want South Africa, if you want Nigeria, you find it. It's similar to what the Asians have done with the East London shopping mall, which is Southeast Asia's own built boutique. That, okay, we have a lot of activities here. Our people are doing one ceremony or the other, week in, week out, weddings, naming ceremonies. Our embassies are having functions, having all manner of activities. How do we harness all this and get a bite of it? It is by having that kind of center where we'll have event venues, we'll have hotels, we'll have food courts, we'll have international film studio that should support the emerging creative sector. I mean, you see Nollywood is unleashing, and there are a lot of collaborations. So these are the places where we can have that, including African students having accommodation space.
What can Africans living in the UK learn from the Asian community?
Well, quite a lot, because in terms of galvanizing themselves and pulling their resources together to become an economic force. They have done this through the big companies, Indian companies like Tata, big players in this economy. So we are trying to use the Africa Town model to pull in that kind of resourcing. We have good manufacturing base in Africa. Big companies in UK like H&M and others go and set up factories in Ethiopia and some other countries, even in Asia. And you can see the brands labeled, made in Cambodia, made in this. So what stops Africans producing in Africa through an outlet and retail get across their products to people here in UK? Because it's the hub. People come here to spend money.
Your recent event, held at the United Nations International Maritime Organization, brought out some big names, including the First Lady, Mrs. Aisha Bahari. Do you think some key stakeholders are finally realizing the importance of engaging with the diaspora?
Yes, of course. This has been the mission for which my organization has been advocating, and I've been at the vanguard of propagating this message that there's greater synergy when the diaspora Africans and the leaders come together and chart a course to enhance and unlock the economic potentials of the continent. I mean, we need to tap into these resources. The diaspora has got human capital resource which they can offer. And our recent concluded event at the United Nations International Maritime Organization was a resounding success that sent a message across to everywhere. In fact, some of the feedbacks, even from people like yourself, described it as the diplomatic event of the year. So by all accounts, it was a huge success, and it's now sending the right message that the Africa community in UK is now engaging directly with the Africa Union. And I've been appointed into the technical committee of the AU recently set up a technical committee on the diaspora. And one of the things we're trying to do is to find a way to enhance and bring the AU closer to the diaspora Africans by setting up an economic mission, just like they have in Washington. We already have a full-fledged diplomatic mission, AU mission in Washington. Same we're advocating to have in London. So if we do that, that will give a very robust platform for African diaspora to be engaging more with the continent.
That was Chief Uzo there, the chairman of Ingo UK. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do join us again at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.